do that. Or if you've got your level leaf singly, do that as well. So choose the original, choose 5 that you had, remember, on the outside edge. Yeah, so you've got 5 pieces like that. Now we're not going to go big. If we hold it here, it's going to end up massive, okay? So because of the purpose of the amount we've wired up, plus obviously time, and it's for a child, we're going to go a little bit higher. So it's about here we hold it. And this is wedding real wire, okay? This is not for mossing, it's real wire, it's thinner for the weddings. It's like a 46 gauge. So you might want a piece of that ready as well. So just underneath where the level leaf natural stem finishes, I'm just going to bind round. This piece I'm just going to bring back down with the rest of the wires. It's the wires that make the handle, okay? Keep that one there. Now if you imagine, in the olden days, florists didn't have foam, they weren't lucky enough, yeah? So everything was wired. So if you can imagine what the time consuming part is. And then once we've done that, I'm going to bend my 5 pieces out. That creates your outside edge. Whoops, that didn't help, I just pulled it. Start again. Good, let's go back to another one. Okay, so again, let's go back to my 5. Bind. This is my binding point here, where the binding wire is. Down. Okay. I would do that tight as much as you can because it will stop the swinging. If it's too loose, it swings. Then I get my focal flower, and you obviously can't go in the centre because you've bound it, but to the side of one of them, you place in your focal like that. Yeah, so place it in at the height that you want it. And again, you might want to bind it as tight as you can to stop the swinging. Then what we're doing, remember this is keep straight, this is your handle. You're then going to place your material, and I would work from the outside inwards. So some people do it differently. So you work either side now, and you're bending the material like that, so it's like at an angle. Okay, and it will go either side of the material, so you might want to place them. But the thing is that making sure the lengths are the same. So what you do there, you would make sure the same length in there, and you're constantly squeezing it with your hand really to make sure that your handle is forming and also your binding. But if you want to put it down, you can thread that through to the side if you need to rest your hand. If you can also do it in your hand, you're working with this part, just sort of sit there like that. Yeah. So we're then going to build up. Put my side ones in. I might put some Lysianthus buds in actually for the minute. On top of those ones. Yeah. So it's got one binding point at the top. It's quite good practice to keep the binding wire in the same place as well so it doesn't travel too much. Okay. And then I'm working with some foliages in this middle area, so you're feeding things through really in where you want them. So if you want them there, you would feed them through there. You wouldn't sort of feed it this side and twist it round. So if I want this piece of ruscus there, I feed it through there, and I slightly bend it. So this is now building up my profile. Yeah. And it takes foliage really to stop things from swinging and in place. Probably actually wide up a bit too much foliage. We'll see. We're going to save a bit for the underside. So just locking my stems really in place before I put my next lot of flowers in. Okay. So now I'm going to put in my roses underneath. So again, I want them this side. I'll feed it in that side. Bind that point just to give your hand a bit of a rest. Squeeze the stems together because that's what makes the handle. Yeah. What What do you think some advantages are of doing a wide version of this than compared to the foam version of that we did?
You can move them more, you can move them into the way you want them.
Yeah, you get sort of opportunity to adjust. It's a bit long, that one.
And it's going to be more secure as well.
Secure as well, definitely. What about some disadvantages?
It takes you a week to do it.
Time consuming, yeah. Time consuming.
Can't drink.
The flowers don't drink, so that's limited, isn't it? Obviously, if it's time consuming, it'll end up more expensive. And you're just really building up what you've just done, but you're just threading things through, feeding things through the centre point. We used to have like the shower bouquets, the teardrops. We used to wire everything. But a lot of florists, what they also did was some very traditional florists used moss, a ball of moss in here. So the stems actually were drinking from, I used to work with a florist and she didn't use tape because they didn't have tape. And so she used moss and stems were actually touching the moss and that's how they were actually drinking.
Well, they're drinking just through
Touching the
scent.
moss. Yeah, so the moss, it was wired. So everything you've done apart from taping, and then she would thread it through, and that raw stem would sit in a little ball of moss that's kept moist. And that's what they used to do a lot of.
And would that last as long as it would with the foam? With a little bit of moss?
About the same, really. But it's a bit messy, so you have to sort of work out, you have to be discreet how you cover it. It's very hard with these, whether you should wire up enough or not enough, that's the thing. Getting that right balance. So I'm constantly threading it through my hand and making this handle. Okay, I'm feeding it through and actually checking the handle.
And one binding point.
At one binding point, yeah, that's the good practice. Especially if you go into higher levels, they will actually, if this is a part, I mean, Elaine had it in a level 4 exam, you will get marked down if your binding point travels, which means it goes down and down and down. So it's good practice to sort of try and keep it in the one position. Yeah, and you're just going to keep going really. Okay, so I'm going to get to a point in a second of finishing the bottom so you can sort of see where we're at. Look at it from a bird's eye view as well and a side view. Oops. And if it does swing, then put foliages there to help lock it. Now, we would usually ribbon handle the design as well, so that'd be good to try and practice. And then what I tend to do is always finish with some leaves at the back to sort of support everything up a bit. So you could use ivy or a collar of something. But again, if you use them, you see the ivy wire, so usually what people do is they would turn the ivy that way to cover those wires up. So you'd finish it with a collar around. And just keep going really until you sort of get to a point of stopping that you're happy with. So I can put them in. Then to finish, you bind off so you're happy with it. You squeeze as much as you can. Now the handle is usually the length of your hand, like the fist and a bit. What I would do though is deliberately keep one wire long, okay? So I always push it to one side. My handle gets cut fist and a bit, so it's about this sort of length. Cut away from your face. If your handle's quite thick, you can then taper by cutting some of the wires away upwards, so you get a bit of a nice graduation. When you're happy with that, bring that extra long wire down, and there's a reason why we have one long when we do our ribbon handle. This is the only time that I've now taped it together. I haven't touched any tape at all until now, so I'm going to go around my binding point, all the way down, so you're covering all your wires. Onto the one that you kept deliberately long, just so it's secure, and just pull it off. And obviously we'll ribbon handle that as well after. Okay? So, putting together is not as long as making the wiring and taping. And actually, look, I wired up too much. So you may get to a point where you think you should start it, and then see if you need some more bits.